Good evening, everyone. The countdown to the European elections has begun. 2024 could be an important year for young people, with 16 and 17-year-olds getting to vote for the first time. Will the young generation's vote influence the outcome of the election? Surveys show that young people are less likely to vote, and there is dissatisfaction towards authorities. So, how will political parties canvass this new youth vote? I'm Prerna Humpal, Editor-in-Chief of Debating Europe, which is a citizens' engagement and outreach unit of Friends of Europe. I will be your moderator today, and I'm delighted to have with us 5 panelists from European political parties and political groups. Maïa de Baume, Spokesperson and Press Director of the European People's Party. Didrik de Schaetzen, 2024 Campaign Director and Secretary General ad interim of the Alliance of Liberals and Democrats for Europe. Saar van Bueren, Deputy Secretary General of the Party of European Socialists. Cinta González Sentís, Secretary General of the Federation of Young European Greens. And David Lundy, Head of Communications of the Left in the European Parliament. But to kick off the debate, I'd like to hear from Saar. Tell us a little bit about the Socialists. What are they doing to get the youth vote?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me, for having us. I'm very delighted to be here, especially with this young audience, because I mean, without the support and the participation of young people, the EU has no future. So very important to speak to you and especially hear from you all. My name is Saar van Bueren. I'm the Deputy Secretary General of the Party of European Socialists and Social Democrats. I was also involved in the previous European campaign as campaign manager of the Spitzenkandidat campaign. And well, I think we're going to dive into a lot of subjects with you later, but just shortly to answer your question. I think there are 3 things generally in our approach. And the first thing is to address and deliver issues that matter to young people. Then, of course, not just thinking about policies, also engage with young people on these issues. And then, very important, of course, inspire and support young people to be politically active, because you've proven that you make a difference. So, I mean, when we talk about policies, but we're going to hear from you too. But of course, what we've noticed and experienced and think that are issues that matter for young people are employment, education, social justice, climate, nature, and what we also noticed also in the last campaign, but it hasn't changed when I speak to young people, housing is a big issue for young people. Well, and how to engage with young people? Of course, you have the digital community. It used to be Facebook, Instagram. Now I think it's more TikTok and Be Real. Well, I'm at a certain age that I'm not very active there, but we should be, because I know also my nieces and stepchildren and everything, they get their news from there, YouTube, TikTok. So it's a really different type of communicating that political parties used to do through newspapers, TV debates, etc. So we have to really focus. But that's online. I think it's also very important to engage in person. So with town hall meetings, going to whether it's schools or job places workplaces where a lot of young people are engaged, universities and everything. It really helps to engage between politicians and policymakers and young people. Then something I think politicians, political parties should do is, of course, more and more inspire and engage people and and try to urge them to vote, because we have seen that you make a difference. As I said, a generation ago, a lot young people thought that just having a Facebook post was engaging, but then it turned out that just commenting on Facebook, it doesn't always make the politicians do what they want. So when the young people saw that the politicians were lacking courage on, for example, the climate issue, they went on the streets, and you see what happened. I think, and we have some rumors now that maybe Greta Thunberg next week is also coming to Strasbourg. I think once the young people notice that there's also something at stake with nature and biodiversity, I mean, let yourself be heard, because you make a difference. Also, when you talk to CEOs, they can be very honest about why they changed their big companies into sustainable companies. It wasn't just the business model; it was their kids at the kitchen table asking their parents to change. And then also we saw in the Brexit, and we heard I heard people say that if the young people were more inspired to go to vote and not just stay at the Glastonbury Festival, we would not have had a Brexit. So make yourself heard, but also go and vote. Then one last thing to conclude, because we're talking about the youth always, and of course there are common issues for the youth when you travel around Europe, climate and housing. We've noticed 5 years ago when we traveled, it's whether you live in a rural village in Poland or in Valencia in Spain, those two subjects always come up. But the young are, of course, not one species. You see now in France that young people are protesting about police brutality. You see in Hungary people campaigning on LGBTI rights. You have young people in Sweden and Finland going on the streets because they're concerned and worried about extreme right parties in their government. So we should, of course, pay attention to different issues and consider different backgrounds of young people.
Thank you, Saar. I think you raised some important points. We'll come back to you. I think it's easy to put it on the young people and say they were in Glastonbury, but there is a lot of dissatisfaction amongst the young people, and they are out on the streets perhaps because they feel that their vote is actually taking them to where they want to be, and their voices aren't really being heard by the vote. And perhaps it is more powerful for them to protest or be on the streets because the people in power are not actually listening to them. But we'll come back to this. If we can move forward, Maïa, if you would like to join us in the debate from European People's Party's perspective, what do you think are the concerns of young people, and how is the EPP trying to listen to them and engage with young people?
Yeah, I think all of the mainstream parties have to address this issue for the very first reason that low turnout in European elections often affects young people. It's very hard to mobilize young people, especially in European elections. We know that still Brussels is distant. I mean, it's changing now, but how do you make European elections more attractive to young people is already an issue that to me is quite essential. And so how do you respond to that? How do you attract them? You attract them by convincing them to go vote. And how do you convince them to go vote? And Saar said it the way I would say it, by just talking about the real issues, talking about what really matters to them. And we know, there are Eurobarometers right now to tell us a little bit what they are interested in. We know it since we look at the news. But what I find quite reassuring in some ways is that the issues that are now in the European elections are issues that affect young people, that are true European issues. And I'm thinking about climate change clearly, but I'm thinking also about democracy, about the fact that when you look at a Eurobarometer now, young people are very, very concerned about democracy, about freedom of speech, freedom of thought. So clearly this is an issue. I mean, in every election you would say the same, but probably this time even more because the momentum is clearly rising and we see it every day. I mean, when it comes to, there's climate change, but it comes to unemployment, which I think still is the most important issue that, young people care about just because they are, entering the labor market. And how do you respond to their concerns about not finding a job, not being well paid, but also just today, to me, the real issue is quality jobs. How can you be happy in your job today? Young people want to be happy. They want to have a work-life balance. It's not just about working, it's about, thriving in your work. It has become much more important today than any, that in the past. Climate change, clearly, I'm being very obvious here, but there's such a sense of emergency that, a political party, whatever it is, needs to address that challenge. Whatever the ideas are, it is an urgency. I think in terms of how do you convince them, which is clearly the main issue. I mean, Saar mentioned things that I agree with, with whether it is, you start with bridging the gap between politicians and young people, because, young people don't always feel represented. Politicians are not always young, and I mean, it's changing clearly, but they want to be represented and they want to have people who are more or less in an age range that is young. And I think local engagement is clearly one of the major issues. And, every political party has a youth branch. The EPP has one, and it needs to even improve this, work better on how you engage with young people locally, especially in European elections, where, again, what I'm saying is Europe is still distant. Whatever we think of it, European elections still have a hard time mobilizing them. So the more you reach out to them, the more pedagogical you are, the more you explain what the issues at the European level are, the better you will engage them. But the other issue to me that I find really crucial in terms of how to attract young people is how you communicate. And I think this has been such a challenge for the EU for so many decades. It's like, how do you talk to them in a way that not only is understandable, but is modern, is clear, because we suffer, I think, in Brussels and again of using a jargon that nobody really understands, not talking, using convoluted language sometimes to say things that could be said in a very simple way. But, the EU is complex, the issues are complex, and how do you make them much more understandable to young people? So it's not just about using platforms that, they use, and TikTok is clearly, now it's become like mainstream that you use TikTok, clearly. We all do it and we all have to do it.
And yet not the EU institutions.
I mean, political parties are, I think, but how do you talk to them? How do you use the language that make them feel that it's interesting? It's not just blah blah. It's not just jargon. That to me is one of the key issues here, because the EU suffers from that a lot. And so, yeah, communicate differently. And the other issues, clearly, we know Saar said exactly what the priorities are. So this, I think, is one of the main issues that at least the EPP, but also probably others, will have to deal with. How do you talk to them in an understandable language?
Indeed, Europe is still distant. So question is, how are you, the political parties and political groups who are closer, one would say, to the citizens than, for instance, the EU institutions that are sitting here in Brussels, who don't have access to TikTok. Officially, you're not supposed to have access to TikTok. So you have access to TikTok. So we're counting on you to help us get closer to the young people as well. But we'll bring in another perspective from the Liberals and Democrats, Didrik de Schaetzen.
Thanks. I think at least it's not often that you come to a debate and you already have some sort of achievements, because it's Thursday evening and we've got 68 people that instead of being at Place Lux are connected to the computer and having a debate. So that's already an element of start. I fear I'm going to repeat too much, where maybe I can offer some distance or some differences on what Maïa and Saar brought up. It's mostly about, because on the subjects, I think there's a lot of agreements of what really matters, youth unemployment, climate security, but it's mostly where to get it. And I think that's really maybe a paradigm that we have to evolve as European political parties, because there is really youth engagement. I mean, if we look at the engagement on GoFundMe pages, on petitions, there is a lot of youth engagement. The difference is that now the models of European political parties, where you have to, in our case, take the whole heritage from locksmith to Fukuyama. I mean, the whole point is that we have to find ways that we can channel that engagement, because there is some, and to transfer it also into a vote. And that's not really easy. And that is why process has not been easy, but I'm quite satisfied about the fact of lowering the voting age at European level, because we're doing this mostly because we want to have more engagement, but also more votes from youth. And that is part of the solution. So my main elements to add is be there where the youth is. So we should have had this debate at Plus, but it's still very Eurobubble. But you see what I mean? To be at meetings, at political festivals, they exist. Okay, granted, mostly in Nordic countries, but these are elements where it's important to be. Almedalen, Volkenmeulen, Texel Islands, to speak to Saar in the Dutch islands. But so we have to be where the people are. And we have to offer them solutions on issues that first interest them, and not the whole engagement of the whole package. I think that is part of the solution. But congrats already on all of those of you who are already there. And that's why I want to leave a lot of time for questions. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Indeed, and we already have a few questions lining up. Thank you for those. So I'll ask everybody to make sure that you introduce yourself and your name and your organizations, and keep your questions to a succinct point. So start off with Urban Strandberg, and sorry if I don't pronounce your name correctly.
Perfectly pronounced, thank you. So one fact which is very depressing is that when you look upon the world from a representative point of view, youth is depressingly underrepresented in parliaments and cabinets, in every assembly which democracy is running through. And that is a major problem. And since, representation overall is done through political parties is a key actor, not only when it comes to pronouncing different policies and the content in the policy, but also from an organizational point of view. So I'm quite curious about what the party representatives have to say. I mean, how would it be more attractive for a young person to delve into a political path? I mean, it's hard to go into a political party. There are hierarchies, there are structures, there's old ways of the political parties in which they are organized. I think that those kind of questions are crucial for young people, and I'm curious about to hear what the political parties have to say about that.
Thank you, Urban. We'll take another question from Cleopatra. You've asked a question in the chat. Would you like to speak for yourself, or?
Sure. Yes. Hello, my name is Cleopatra Modici. I am from Greece, and I work for a nonprofit NGO. It's called Action Aid Elas. And I run a project that has to do with young people engaging in debate and potentially advocating for themselves at the European level. And my question is, perhaps one of the reasons why young people do not vote is because they feel that it's kind of pointless. Why vote if my perspective is not going to be taken into consideration when it comes to forming European policy? So my question would be, how do parties plan to incorporate youth voices in their policymaking efforts? Thank you.
those are two very similar questions. Do any of the participants want to? Didrik, go ahead.
Yeah, look, I've had the issue. I'm thinking about the question of Urban. I've been a candidate myself. I'm a late bloomer. I did my political coming out only when I was 32, 33. But I did run for elections at that time. And it's endemic. Huh? The problem is really related to the fact that how our current systems work is very frequently you start at local, you get votes, and they increase by the time you increase your voters base, etc. So it's not easy to change. However, political parties have a role to put youth in front. And you mentioned the statistics, which are catastrophic. I mean, let's look at it. I think it's only Cinta from the Greens that are doing better in the European Parliament, but their average is at 48, I think. In our case, it's 50. So that is a real issue. I think we all know that funny statistics that there's less people less than 30 than people called Martin in the European Parliament. I mean, this is really show how big of an issue this is. And then maybe to Cleopatra, there is an element, and I'm talking about my, again, late coming out around my 30s in politics. If you wait for the perfect political party, the one that really represents your ideas on everything, you're not going to find it. There's no such thing as the Prince Charming's parties. So you have to, there is an element of cynicism and a bit of frustration of to say, look, I have to find the one that's the closest to my idea, dare to say the less worse. And that's the one where I want to influence and change. And it's not quick. And that is it's an element that speaks against it. And that is not, I'm not saying this that there's no solution. I think there are solutions, but there is also an element that to change the world, because I think that's all objectives, or at least should be, of the politicians. There is an element of it's a tiresome process and it takes a bit of time. And so let's hope that by showing the effects, reaching to a conclusion, that we'll get there. I mean, it took us 50, 60 years to just not beat each other up at European level, not have wars. So it took a while, but I think change has to come quicker, but there is still a process to follow. That's what I wanted to say to Cleopatra mostly.
Saar, can you respond to the point about power structures and hierarchies in political parties? How can young people break through that?
Sure. Well, I can provoke a little bit here, maybe, and I do that in copying a bit the former Spokesperson candidate of the Party of European Socialists and Democrats, Frans Timmermans. He used to say also in a town hall with young people, like, I mean, of course you're right, but just asking it is also quite easy. Just also do it. Try to change the system from within. And there are examples. I mean, I'm not saying it's easier, because it's true, and not only for young people, also for women or people from different backgrounds. It's still a tougher fight maybe than some others. But you also have to do it, and there are examples. I mean, in my party or in the group in the parliament from the Socialists and Democrats, you have a few young MEPs who actually show day to day that they climb up the ladder by just being there and being damn good, and prove themselves, and keep on improving themselves, like Alicia Holmes and Delara Burkhardt and Mohammed Shaheen. I mean, they are not backbenchers. They are really fighting for issues that concern young people, but issues that concern everyone in Europe. So it is possible, but of course the old structures are there, but not only for young people, but really change the system from within as well. Just not only on the street protesting. I mean, that is already helping, as we said before, but change it from within. And I can also say, and also through the youth organizations. I mean, we have someone here from a youth organization. We will hear from her, I hope. The Young European Socialists are also very active. We involve them also in our campaigns and in of course in writing our manifestos and everything. We have a consulting round now already with 260 organizations, also all kinds of youth organizations. So we are trying, we're doing really our best to make the voices of different groups and also young people heard. So it's a bit of a, parties have to change, but young people just don't be shy.
Okay, young people, don't be shy, but can we put the onus on young people, and shouldn't systems and parties look inward in terms of how they look at diversity, how they look at young people, women as well, and what they can be doing actively to promote those?
I wasn't saying that we shouldn't have.
No, absolutely, but it goes both ways. I think it's wonderful to see stellar performers outshining others, but we need to look at leveling the playing field as well. Maïa, do you want to come in there? And then we go to Cinta later.
I think it raises a question that I find quite interesting these days, is how much there is still real political affiliation, a sense of affiliation for young people. Do they still believe in those party structures, even if we know these party structures need to be reformed at some point, because probably they're intimidating maybe for young people. But there's also a sense of how much, a sense of what is a party for these days. There is a conversation to have, and I think a thought process on how not only these are useful, but how can they be much more useful and less, more horizontal in some ways. And the second thing, is I also think that I'm not a secretary general, I'm only a spokesperson, and I deal with communications. But I think in terms of communications, again, I think it's important for parties to really sort of put the focus on the success stories of their young politicians too. All over Europe, there are so many now young politicians, to be honest. It's, society is changing. So put the focus also on those who really matter, so that they serve as model for others, that young people see that they can be represented, that, that young politicians are there and are eager to fight and show how to fight to these young people.
Thank you, Maïa. We have many more questions, but I want to give the floor now to Cinta González Sentís, who's the Secretary General of the Federation of Young European Greens, so actively promoting young candidates. So it's perfect timing to bring you in. Cinta, please tell us a little bit about how you are trying to bring young people to come to vote, but also to stand and represent their issues.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the invitation. I think that this is a very interesting question, and indeed it links to the questions that the other colleagues already put forward. I will start saying that indeed the average age of the member of the European Parliament is actually 49.5. So this is the average age, and also only the 6% of the members of the European Parliament are younger than 35. Even if actually the 20% of the people living in Europe are between 18 and 35, but we are only 6% in the parliament. So therefore, there is indeed a lack of representation. And what I can say is that in the European Green Party, in the last Congress that we had in June, last month, we approved a resolution in which we were committing as a party. So this was not the youth wing, but it was the actual party, committing to have more young candidates and investing our resources and putting in place specific structures to empower young candidates to run in the next elections and to run in electable positions. This is something that already happened in 2018, ahead of the 2019 elections. And the result is that indeed the Green group in the European Parliament is the youngest group. And this year we hope to be even younger. There's also something very important here, is that I really think that we don't have to look at this genius, one-of-a-kind young person who is brilliant and who is perfect. I think that in the same way that there's people who is older than 35, who is just human, but is worth being represented. It's the same for young people. So anyone should be suitable to represent their fellow neighbors. And this is something that we lack in the institutions. And I think that one of the reasons why there's so few young people in institutions is because there's a lack of recognition of our life experiences. It seems like the life experiences that are worth representing are those lives that you have already been like 10 or 15 years in the private sector, and then, oh, maybe I'm going to try to be a politician, which is amazing, but is most of the stories of politicians. It seems like being a student is not worth representing. It seems like, combining your student job in the summer, being a waitress, and then going to university is not worth representing. Why is it not worth representing if probably a huge percentage of people in Europe is having these lives and is having specific struggles because of that? I think that young people is worth representing, and we are our best voice. And indeed, parties are very often I think that parties are structures that sometimes are hard to understand. And like the institutions, they take some time to be flexible to change. But yeah, it also depends on what is the aim of this party. So I really think that the reason for lowering age is not about having more people voting or about increasing engagement. No, it's about believing to the core, being convinced that someone who is 16 is as much of a citizen of someone who is 35 or 40 or 50. And in the same way that you can already have a work contract, you can also have a saying on how this legislation process that is going to affect your life as a worker is going to be impacting you. So I think that these are some of the key things for me on youth participation and youth representation. And yeah, I hope that there's going to be more questions, and it was a good overview of what we are doing in that sense.
Thank you. Yes, and indeed, helpful perspective of 6% representation of young people in the parliament, but 20% representation in the overall population in the EU. So that says a lot. We'll quickly move to the left, perhaps. David Lundy has joined us. He's the head of communications of the left in the European Parliament. I'd love to hear your perspective on how you are bringing young people to come to the vote. Do you have the confidence of the young people, and how are you going to get them to come in to the vote on the day itself? David.
All right. Yeah, thanks, Prerna. I just flag a few of the issues and concerns that seem to matter a lot to young people. I've been looking through a recent Eurobarometer report of where they surveyed 26,000 15 to 30-year-olds on their attitudes to politics and the issues that matter to them. So I think basically on the left, what we would try to do would be to focus on the issues. I think the issue of representation that was mentioned by Cinta González just now is extremely important. It also applies, I think, in terms of underrepresentation of working class people and the marginalized in general, and it certainly applies to young people. But looking at the issues that seem to be foremost concerns for young people in Europe, at least in terms of that Eurobarometer survey, we've got the obvious ones that people think of, like climate, but I would flag the issue of precariousness in work and inequality. And that's something that the left has, built its movement on since the 19th century. It's something that we prioritize and is at the heart of our movements. And it's definitely something over the next year we'll be highlighting in terms of our MEPs and their consistent push for fair working conditions, secure contracts and living wages. For example, in the gig economy sector, where the workforce is vast majority under 30, and by generally championing working working people's rights and income redistribution. I think that's probably our best route to addressing the concerns of young Europeans. I also noticed from the same survey the importance of human rights, democracy, and inclusive societies to young people. And I feel like there is a general sense of unease about the rise of the far right and the erosion of democratic values. The young people I meet seem to want to, as most of us do, live in societies where diversity is celebrated, where their rights and freedoms are protected. And I think they have a steadfast ally in that, on that front in the left. Our tradition in countering the far right has been extremely strong, and in defending inclusive policies, defending human rights, and standing up for the marginalized and oppressed. And in that context, I would like to take the opportunity to flag, I think, I was a little bit late, and apologies for that, unless it's been mentioned already, but the murder of a 17-year-old boy for a traffic offence last week in Paris is something we will certainly be trying to raise on the European agenda. And I think that's an issue that affects young people most severely, more than any other age group, is the issue of police brutality and racism. And it's something that on the left we've taken extremely seriously, and we've raised several times here in the European Parliament. So basically, I think defending democracy will be crucial against the far right, and promoting equality through decent work standards in Europe is something that we will continue to defend and try to communicate it better to young people.
Thank you, David. We'll go now to the questions that are desperately waiting to be heard, starting with Agatha. Is there an Agatha?
Yes, that's me. Thank you so much for giving me the floor. Hi, everyone. I'm Agatha from Generation Climate Europe. For those of you who don't know us, we're a youth climate coalition. So we bring together youth-led networks working on climate and environmental issues, and elections are certainly a really big and important priority for us. Since I am coming from a youth organization, I did hear youth multiple times. I wanted to hear a little bit more from the different speakers that we have here today on how are you concretely planning to collaborate with the different youth organizations, also recognizing that we have different youth organizations. We have networks, we have those active at the national level, we have those that are connected to the different groups, and we really have a large diversity of youth stakeholders. And I think that's often overlooked when we talk about youth engagement. It's not just about young people, it's not just about youth organizations as a whole. There are a number of different youth stakeholders there. So I'd be very curious to know a little bit more what your concrete plans are to collaborate with us, to involve us, and what value do you see going forward in that partnership as well? Thank you.
Thank you. Very, very important question. Didrik, I see your hands up. First one to go again.
Yeah, it might sound a bit cliche, huh? but I think in the end, the element of the manifesto, which agreed is not the most, it's a long document, it's not easy to see what we really want for elections, but it's super open. So not only is it open in the way that you can submit your proposals and your point of view, but we really have a process of town hall meetings. I mean, I mentioned Folkemøde again for the Danish one around. I mean, this is a festival with hundreds of thousands, really 100,000 people, and there is a way to contribute. So that is one of the tools that we're doing, and obviously we work together with our own youth association and LIMEC, etc. But I think the open process of manifestos, and I know the other political parties do it in a different way, but these town halls are part of the solution. It won't solve everything, but I think that is part of how to at least give the opportunity to be heard.
Anyone else? What is the... Cinta, please go ahead.
Yes, I can talk mostly for the Young European Dreams. I think we collaborated for the COP26 in Glasgow with the Generation Climate Europe also. So from our side, we are actually this year and next year starting to work on all these relationships that we have been fostering during the last years with other youth organizations. And this is something that we are doing as Young Greens, of course. And then we are having an impact on the manifesto of the European Green Party. But something that I really want to say now, that there's someone from a network, from a European network, is the problem that we have, the youth organizations. The youth organizations have a big problem with funding. It's very hard to engage young people. I started being active in youth organizations when I was 16, and of course I was attracted by the actions that youth organizations do, but the main problem we have is that we are basically always in survival mode. I'm sure that if there's anyone coming from a youth organization, working in a youth organization, or volunteering in a youth organization, we are constantly struggling to survive. Whether if it's at the national level or at the international level, it's very difficult to have enough resources to both maintain the life of the organization and have a good mental health as an activist and as a young person. Combining all this with our own lives and families and whatever is going on, and at the same time being effective. And this has to do a lot of what's going on in the institutions. At the end of the day, the policymakers are also choosing not to put enough money for subsidies and grants for young people and for people who is already organized. So indeed, the youth organizations, we can play a big role in connecting institutions with people who is not yet organized and who is not yet aware of what's going on at the European level. But if we don't have the funding, we are just going to go nowhere. And therefore, I would say that one thing that is very important and that the Greens are truly committed to is to come up with better funding and more comprehensive systems for youth organizations to survive and thrive and be able to increase our outreach, so we can have people participating not only in elections, but also in other participative channels, petitions, conferences, and so on and so forth.
Thank you. What about our two big political groups?
It's hard to say, in the sense that yes, youth branches are powerful. We have one that is very powerful and we engage with a lot, but clearly there is an effort here to be made, I think, in just not necessarily in using youth organizations to even enhance content, especially now that, you know, manifestos are being drafted, as Didrik said, and that youth organizations are instrumental in providing content to be able to make a manifesto clear, smart, interesting, and, you know, engaging. But I mean, at the end of the day, I often think that, you know, in the end, digital engagement is the key to engage young people even more, and, you know, maybe less structure and more direct engagement through all the platforms we know. I'm not going to list them all, but clearly this is more of, to me, a way of, you know, modernizing a bit more, like having less structures, but more direct engagement.
Okay, Saar?
Sorry, I was unmuted after all this time, still did. No, I mean, obvious on Amate's question of the youth or the organizations, the different ones. We are having this open process, just like what Didrik was saying for their party, for his party. So we're still in that consulting process. Everybody can reach us. You can. There are different meetings where the young youth or different youth organizations can put forward their plans, their wishes, and really help shaping and drafting our resolution and later manifesto. I don't think we've done it in the town hall. That's a different style indeed, but we are doing it a lot in the next, we've been doing it and we're doing it the next few months. So if you haven't participated in our party, then please send us an email or give us a call. The youth organization, yeah, I know it's a struggle. We engage a lot with our youth organization. Yes, we organize events with them together. Yes, we do a lot together. So I think it helps that the umbrella party really supports the young European socialists. But yes, I agree also with Maïa saying. So we're all doing our best in this, but it can. I think it's true. I mean, and also on policies, what Cinta was saying. I mean, I think it's a good thing that in the parliament, like banning internships without being paid and that kind of stuff. I mean, all little steps help, I hope.
Okay, David.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Just from our side, okay, so the main kind of point of contact is with the youth working group of the Party of European Left. That's a body that focuses on working conditions, education and social civil rights, LGBTIQ plus issues. But then I would say the main venue in which our MEPs get to listen to young activists and kind of have a discussion with them would be our group meetings, which are often reserved for kind of, you know, specific debates on the issues or reports and stuff come up in the European Parliament. But then we do generally try to make space to meet with civil society, NGOs, etc., and have a discussion with them. Just a few recent examples, are not so recent, over the last like year and a half, I'd say. We had the Balance Tombard women who were survivors of often teenagers and people in their early 20s who survived sexual harassment here in Brussels, in bars, that was committed in bars. We've had the Fridays for Future activists several times. We've had young platform workers organizations in the group to discuss with MEPs about upcoming legislation. And then we recently had a conference called Youth Against Fascism, where we met with different anti-fascist organizations, young anti-fascist organizations from across Europe to discuss how they can meet each other and collaborate better.
Thank you, David. There is indeed much more room for collaboration. We have somebody in the chat sharing a one-pager checklist for engaging with young people. So if you're looking for ideas, do look in our chat for some new ideas. Let's move on to the questions that are pending. Chaya, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, thank you so much, and good evening to everyone, and thank you so much for the presentation so far. My name is Shahaya. I'm from the Council of European Municipalities and Regions, and I think one of the gaps I've seen so far in the discussion has really been about how do we connect at the local level? How do we connect with locally elected officials? How do we ensure that there is a link between the Brussels bubble, the EU sphere, to what actually happens, not only at national level, but then at the roots of where the citizens engage? And so my question to all of the panelists is, how are you engaging with locally elected officials, governments, and also how are they associated to your different parties? Maybe one of the elements that we see in our own work at the Council of European Municipalities and Regions, we have a cohort of young elected local officials under 40, maybe not so young, I guess. But essentially what we hear from their feedback is enormous amounts of pressure even to be elected at a local level. The same stresses that youth organizations feel are sometimes even more exacerbated with lack of funding, lack of resources. Sometimes they do it part-time, and they really see a huge lack of support when it comes to the national government. And so they also face enormous challenges. So how can we actually bridge that gap and support those officials really from the beginning of politics, which happens from the local all the way up into what we see at European level? If we look at Charles Michel, I mean, he was the mayor of Wavre. There are plenty of examples in our leadership which started at local level. So that's my challenge and question to the panelists. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Cinta, do you want to take the...
Yes, thank you so much. Also, this is a really nice question. I also started, of course, at the local level in my hometown. In the European Green parties, we do have a local councillors network. This is a space where all the elected representatives at the local, even sometimes less than local, like as if it was the commune in Brussels, for example. So in the different local councils at different levels, but also at some point regional people elected in regional parliaments are members of this network. And this is a space for exchange. And it's also true that in many occasions, the politicians who are young are also in local councils. Besides that, in the Green Group in the European Parliament, there is also a group that is working to have all this connection with the different, especially governments, but also big opposition groups of Greens in the state and regional, so national and regional levels. And I think that there's something very important here, and is the issue about, for example, the climate crisis. Of course, there's no borders for climate crisis, but the local level is one of the places in which we can act the fastest, is the place where we can reduce or limit the use of cars, is the place where we can put in place good public transportation, connecting different cities, cities working together to avoid, for example, short flights and all these other experiences that are just contributing to climate change. So for us, it is very, very important to make sure that our local councillors are really connected among them, and that their policies are being somehow coordinated and that are in the same page. And yeah, again, our priority to fight against climate change is one of the examples in which we can better see how it is very important for us to have these coordinated policies.
Thank you. Didrik?
Yeah, I would argue on that question that actually it's a little bit part of the problem, because I think, and I don't have the stats right here, I'm a bit focused on European data, but I think quite often the parcours really goes from local to regional to national to European, and that's a little bit part of the problem why there's so little youth at European elements. So I would find tons of examples of people who started locally, and in a way it makes sense, because you get engaged first by issues that touch you at the local level, direct things you want to influence. So there is a pattern there. So to answer more the question, we have very well functioning networks of mayors. That's really something that works quite well. And there the committee of the region is actually doing a great job. But I think the problem of youth engagements, I would argue, and I hope somebody does have the stats about that, but I would argue it's very likely there's much more youth active at local level, and that doesn't really solve our issue, how to transfer that at European level.
Thank you. We're running out of time, so we'll take one last question so that we have time for a final round of comments, if any, from our panelists. Francis.
Hey, thanks very much to all of the speakers for the presentations. I'm Francis, and I work with the European Network on Statelessness, so working with a broad range of stateless communities across Europe, campaigning on different issues affect them. And I'm conscious that stateless people are one of the many groups of people in Europe who are European residents for the most part, but who do not have the right to vote, as with many migrant communities and many others who are excluded from the voting system. And I wanted to ask to the speakers how you plan to kind of engage with and still represent people living in your different territories, different countries, living in Europe, but who are excluded from the voting system, but still carry a huge amount of power in influencing different debates, and whose lives are, of course, still very deeply affected by the different policies put forward in manifestos and others. And so, yeah, that was kind of first side of the question. The second side is also, how do we, as civil society networks and activist networks, also kind of where are the ways that we can find for these communities to engage and to have their voices heard, despite the fact that they are excluded from the voting system and therefore the parliamentary elections are not necessarily kind of the only or even a tool that's possible for them to make their voices heard. Thank you.
Thank you, Frances. How do we engage with stateless people? Indeed. Cinta?
Yes, actually, during the past few years, during the past few months, actually, especially after the pandemic, in the European Young Greens, we have been collaborating with Diaspora Vote and with also another Equinox Racial Justice Initiative. So we have been collaborating with these two organizations in order to make our organization more diverse, because we do acknowledge that we are too white, and this is of course a problem because we are missing the bigger picture. And in that sense, indeed, this is something that we want to work with. And actually, from the narrative, the campaign narrative that the Young Greens is working on does include migration. This is a topic that we want to talk about not from a reactive point of view, but from an active point of view. We don't want to react to the fake news and racism of the far right, but we want to directly address this very unfair situation in which our fellow neighbors who are in a very complicated administrative situation, how they are living here and working here and paying taxes here, but they are not considered full citizens. This is really shameful. And this is why we are collaborating with these racial justice organizations that I mentioned.
Thank you. Thank you, Cinta. We'll now move on to the final round of comments from the panelists. And before I open the floor to the panelists, I'll maybe share a little bit about Debating Europe. In the next couple of months, we'll be launching a round of focus group consultations with young people across Europe. And we hope to be able to share the findings of young people's voices and their concerns, their hopes ahead of the elections next year with candidates to the European elections. So I hope to count on the political groups present here to be able to listen to us in a couple of months when they'll be very, very busy. But with that, I'll open the floor to our panelists and invite them to respond to any other points that have been raised in the debate today. And perhaps you could share with me if you think that the right to vote should be extended to 16-year-olds across all countries and perhaps across all elections. Starting with perhaps Maïa.
I think it should be extended to most European countries. I mean, to answer your last question, because I think at 16 years old, you are totally able to vote. And I think it would be a very good societal progress, let's say. And I also think that, voting is such a source of pride for anyone. Like the first time you vote, you're proud of voting, and it's a responsibility that is given to you, and you feel empowered, and you feel like your vote counts. And even if you're not mature enough, sometimes to really, it's a first time experience. I think these are the people that we should even attract the most, because they are the ones that are still, entering this world of politics, not knowing exactly how it works, being a bit maybe influenced by others. And these are the ones that, are probably more innocent, and that we need to find the right language to attract these ones, especially when they're young like this, and that, they are the ones that probably we will care the most about for the future.
Thank you, Maïa. David?
Yeah, I can quick yes on votes for 16-year-olds. That's something our parties are generally in favor of at the national level, of course. And then just on the question, actually, last thing, because I didn't get a chance to say on the statelessness question, and it's something I wanted to address earlier on as well. I think key will be bursting this bubble that we are in here in Brussels. I think that's crucial for young people, for stateless people, for marginalized people. There's a tendency here in Brussels to kind of use jargon a lot. It's usually unnecessary, and I think we need to stop it and throw those words in the bin. It's a way of telling people this is none of your business. It's a way of making things technical when they're actually extremely political. And what we would try to say to people is that this is yours, this is for you, this is about you. It's not about dudes in suits on long corridors in Brussels at all. So yeah, I just end on that note, and yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Cinta?
Yeah, I would say, of course, we are in favor of lowering the age to 16 years old. I also want to acknowledge that many youth councils across Europe at the regional and national level are not only in favor of lowering it to 16 years, but in some instances, they are even in favor of exploring for having a way in which younger people can also participate in decision-making processes, and therefore having a deeper deliberative democracy in which also children participate, because they are also citizens and they also have rights. And then also just a quick point, I think that we talk about like we have to find a way of communicating with young people. I don't think we have to find a way of communicating with young people. What we have to do is we have to give validation to their demands, because what happens normally from institutions or from politicians is that when young people is protesting and saying what they want, they are treated as uneducated, or they are treated as children that don't know what they want, or they are treated as their demands are actually not worth it and not serious and not something to be taken into account.
Indeed. Thank you, Cinta. Democracy begins at an earlier age. If any of you have children, you know that they have an opinion as well, and you need to start asking and offering choices much early on. But we'll move on. Didrik.
Yeah, look, I'll sum it up. First of all, I think it's great if we lower to 16, especially that it's a bit of a test case. We'll manage to see if the voter turnout increase. There's baby steps. None of us here had the super solution that would include everything. So there's lots of points, but let me focus on one. It's improve the engagement for us. So you have to go both to festivals. You have to be on Be Real and on TikTok and on Insta. You even have to be on Friends of Europe, but I mean, these small formats here, these 50, 60 people here, that's part of the solutions. Two, I think it helps to go with single issues. I mean, it starts by targeting those who are so engaged in defending the rights of LGBTI, on the environment, on civil rights, on the economy. Try to find them there and then bring them in the debate. And then I have to agree with David on the fight against acronyms. I mean, I'm an old guy of 45, but I still get as frustrated about stuff like when you have to explain to anybody that the Council of Europe has nothing to do with the European Council or the Council of the EU. I mean, Jesus, where do we start? So I think that is part of the things we'll need to fix. And let's get a joint party resolution on at least clarifying some of that shit that is already going to really help people understand and also know how to engage better. Thank you.
Thank you. Saar?
Yes, hi. On the 16-year-old age, I'm personally very much in favor. My national party is as well. Generally in the PES statutes or manifesto, it's not a written rule yet. We have several parties who are in favor, several are still thinking about it. So there's not a conclusion on that, but I agree with, personally, I agree with all the arguments we heard here. Yes, as a sum up, I can underline also what everybody's been saying, of course, and then I repeat my first 3 points from the opening, that we have to address and deliver on the issues that matter to young people. We have to engage with young people on this issue and inspire them and support young people to be politically active and vote. And then I think also we are out of time now, but I would really, I would have asked the question also back to the audience. If there's also a wider audience, then still a bit publish, I think we all are, because it's all, I mean, the people that we've heard, it was very interesting, and we applaud you for being here, but you also sound like the organized people already in organizations. So you are kind of very much engaged already, and thank you for that. But the questions that were put to us and that we kind of are trying to look for solutions and answers, I would have liked to put back to the young people who are not that organized, to say like, okay, how, so you're not voting now, or you don't know yet what to vote, what do you think we as political parties or representatives or politicians should do to make you more engaged and go to the ballot box in the end? I would have liked to hear also from some young people who are not that engaged themselves already. But maybe that's something for a next round, or something for an open debate somewhere.
That'll indeed be for early next year, when we'll bring you the voices of young people through our focus groups that we'll be conducting over the next few months. Thank you to all the panelists. Thank you to everyone in the audience and for your questions. We appreciate it. This is a recorded event, so we invite you to follow up, watch it later, share it, and don't forget to vote. Thank you.